hour. So I hope you're all doing well. I hope you've had a fabulous January. I don't know how it's already February, but it is. And that means summer is fast approaching. So I know many of you are here because you're thinking about summer plans. We did, by the way, have a webinar specifically on summer plans back in December, which I know sounds absolutely wild, but many of like the really competitive, so to speak, summer programs, their applications are due in like January-ish, some of them February. So anyway, we intentionally meet super early to talk about summer specifically. If you're interested in that, I'd be happy to share that recording. Just shoot me an email and I can send that to you. So today I will touch on summer plans, but I do want to mention, like, I'm not going to go all in on summer. This is really big picture extracurricular stuff. Thinking about a little bit this summer, but more what you could do year round. And, you know, all 4 years of high school, rather, not of college. Well, some of these things should ideally, you know, bleed into college as well. But let me jump in and let's get going. So again, welcome. I did open this to the public today. So some of you, you know, most of you are my kids, and I'm so glad to see you. But some of you are not. So if you don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Jess. You can just call me Jess. And I'm glad you're here today. So as I mentioned, I was still letting some people in, but just to be really clear, today is about not specifically only summer, though we will touch on it. It's about extracurriculars in general. And also I want to say we're not really going to talk about them in the way they're usually discussed. I am a firm believer that we don't engage in extracurricular activities to impress anybody, right? Especially not colleges. We're not looking, you know, you don't need to be president. There's other ways to lead, things like this. Rather, I want you to leave here with an understanding of how colleges evaluate extracurricular activities, yes, but more how you as a student should be making decisions, whatever grade you're in, based on your own passions and what you love to do. And then also, as an afterthought, how we fit those into your application story, right? It's all puzzle pieces that come together. We should never approach our extracurriculars as something we are doing to put on our college applications. And I know that feels almost antithetical of everything my job title is, right? College admissions counselor, right? All that we do will eventually go on your college applications, of course. But I'm telling you, the most selective colleges, when they look at an extracurricular profile, they can tell the kids that they want are the ones who are chasing extracurriculars that they genuinely love. They're aligned with their heart, their values, their purpose. That's what colleges are wanting. They're not wanting somebody to put something on their extracurricular activities list just because it will look good, right? And I think we inherently know this, but I do feel obligated to explicitly say that up front. So if you're younger, if you're in middle school, 9th grade, 10th grade, this will help you avoid some common mistakes early on. If you're a junior, I know I have some of my juniors here. We'll talk a little bit about how to align your extracurriculars, how to get some depth in there and strategy. You've got a little bit of lead time now. This is a great time to put some final touches on our extracurricular profile. And also, I do want to acknowledge if you already are doing a lot, but you want to think creatively about how everything fits together, you're in exactly the right place. That's what we'll talk a little bit about today. So feel free to throw questions in the chat as I'm going along. I will have time at the end for Q&A though. But I'm happy to stop as we're going through this. So let's start by clearing something up. One of the biggest myths in college admissions is that the more activities, the better, right? And that this automatically makes your application stronger. However, admissions officers are not counting clubs. In fact, I have some former admissions officers in here today for my team. I know it's actually not totally uncommon for a student to not fill up all of the slots on an activities list, okay? And there are 10 spots on your activities list, but they're not counting how many you've got on there, and they're definitely not assuming that if you're busy, you're making an impact. Let me say that again. Being busy does not equal impact. So in fact, a long unfocused activity list, so you're filling 10 spots, but it's unfocused, there's not a common thread, that often can work against students, okay? We'll talk a little bit about that today. But again, it's not uncommon for a student to have 7 activities, 8 activities, not all 10 things filled, and still be admitted to selective universities. It's about depth. Okay, we'll talk about that here in a sec. The other thing that's a very common misconception is that prestigious sounding activities, elite programs, name brand organization, impressive titles, research, right? I often have families ask me, how can my kid get research? These things do not automatically carry weight. Admissions officers do know, they've been through it. They do know which activities are selective and which are what, some people might call pay to play. Now, I'm not saying that a pay to play program is never beneficial. I will mention that toward the end here today. But admissions officers can absolutely tell the difference between prestige and impact, okay? What matters is what the student actually does. So let's jump forward and go deeper here. So these 5 criteria come up again and again in the admissions office, okay? So the first one is impact. The first 2, in fact, you'll hear me say a lot, initiative and impact. Those are things I always tell my students to look at when they're evaluating their own extracurricular profile. So impact would be who is affected and how. I do want to mention impact doesn't have to mean scale, okay? It doesn't mean that you have to have a national nonprofit or, have thousands of people or recognition on a national scale. Impact means someone benefited. It could be a small group. It could be 1 person, 2 people, 3 people. Somebody benefited, something improved, a need was addressed, okay? So put this into practice. Tutoring 5 students consistently can absolutely matter more than founding a nonprofit that doesn't ever get off the ground, right? We want to look at you're making an impact on somebody, something, someone. The next, my other big I here, initiative. So did you step forward or just participate? Initiative is the key that changes everything. So 2 students could be in the same exact club. They're both in student government. They're both in cheerleading. They're both in, you name it, any club. 2 students can be in the same club and have completely different applications, right? Initiative is absolutely the thing that separates joining from leading, attending from creating, and following from shaping. So admissions officers are absolutely looking for evidence that a kid doesn't just show up. They moved something forward. And I again want to say, this doesn't mean you have to have a title, all right? I just met with one of my students right before we hopped in here about her extracurriculars, and we were talking about, I had a student who's now at SMU a couple of years ago. She's probably, I think she's a junior now. And she was just an athlete on the basketball team, right? On JV, she was just a basketball player. First of all, that is fabulous. Athletes learn so much more than just their sport, right? We know this. I know I'm biased as the wife of a college football coach, but truly. But rather than just saying, the obvious on her extracurriculars, she played basketball, she went to practice, she competed in games, right? We were in conversation about what her kind of informal role was on the basketball team. And we came up with, as she was kind of sharing all of the things she did, she was totally the team hype man. That's not an elected position, okay? She was not captain, but she was absolutely the team hype man. She told me that she had a handshake with every athlete on her team. And before the game, she dabbed them up, did their handshake, and got them all pumped up before they got on the court. She didn't play often, I remember. She wasn't particularly good either. So she was on the sidelines, but she wasn't just sitting there passively. She was cheering her friends on the bus from away game. She was blasting music, right? That was Zara, okay? And so when I think about how we frame activities on the extracurricular activities list, rather than just saying, I attended practice, I participated in warm-ups, but if you can instead frame that as I was the team hype man, I was the last one off the field. I was walking the bleachers before we left after practice to make sure there was no trash. I was always noticing my friends who needed, a little pick me up before a game or after a loss. I had a student last year who coaches changed in the middle of his time with the football team, and he listed on his extracurriculars that he was part of building that culture with new leadership. Right? These are all things that do not require a title. I know I'm lingering on initiative, but that's a really important one. Students can take initiative without having a title. So don't get caught up in that. Colleges don't only admit the president of the student body, right? They admit they're building a class. Something I talked about with my juniors last week. We had our webinar at College App Kickoff. where I talked about how admissions officers build a class. And one big takeaway from that is, again, not every kid is the homecoming queen. Not every kid is the cheer captain. They're building a class of all different types of kids, and they want to see how you fit into their puzzle. Okay, so initiative matters. Initiative doesn't mean a leadership title. Substance. So is the work real or symbolic? I will also say the opposite. You don't want to over exaggerate either. Okay. I'm in a forum for high school counselors, and somebody a couple of days ago had posted in there, I forget the college, but like, hey, everybody, has anybody gotten a call from this college? I just got a call from their admissions team asking to verify a student's extracurricular. And David's shaking his head yes, because he's on my team. He was an admissions officer at Brown. And he knows, like, 100%, they can tell when you over exaggerate. They will absolutely call your school and ask your counselor, did Johnny really do this? Does this club actually exist? Is he actually this title? And by the way, there are other students applying from your high school too. So if there's like 5 of you that say you're president of the finance club, like that can't be a thing, right? Like they 1000% call and verify if you're a borderline kid. So when I say substance, I don't mean over exaggerate to make things seem like they're more substantial than they really were, but the true substance, what was that to you, right? What does that look like to you? Growth, we'll talk a little bit about year on year. You should be building on your extracurriculars. So they're looking for, is your responsibility and challenge increasing over time? So, and that's more important than titles again. It's about increased responsibility. Even if you don't ever get to that elected position with a formal title, are you increasing your responsibility in some way? Are you increasing your ownership? Are you increasing your challenge? Colleges really love to see more responsibility, more complexity, more independence. A student who stays deeply involved and then grows is far more compelling than somebody who's just looking for titles. And then last thing, selectivity. Again, when I go back to that pay to play program, that I'm kind of referencing that here. I'm not saying that you have to be in selective extracurriculars either. I'm not saying that you have to go to the most competitive summer programs or anything like this, or even the most competitive programs at your high school, whatever that looks like. But if there is an option, that can enhance your profile. I'll touch on that at the end here. All right, chugging along here. So if you take a picture of one slide today, this is the one that you should take a picture of, okay? So the strongest extracurricular profiles have these things. They're cohesive, all right? They are cohesive. They tell a story. So clear theme or direction. My juniors, we'll talk about this once we finish out this school year and we get your summer plans underway. And your junior year summer, we'll develop what we call a marketing theme, right? Which is essentially a common thread that ties all of your extracurricular activities together in a pretty bow. And I do want to call out too, I have quite a few students who apply undecided. And so I do want to say that your marketing theme doesn't have to be tied to your major necessarily. It can be tied to just general leadership, or even if you're undecided, you may have a direction that you're kind of figuring out. So even if you're applying to exploratory programs or undecided majors, you can still have a clear theme or direction. And admissions officers also are going to look for depth, okay, in 1 to 2 areas. So maybe you explored something as a sophomore and you went deeper as a junior. I'll give examples of that later on today. And then there's rising challenge, like I just mentioned, and tangible outcomes. So again, that you're making an impact on somebody. So an admissions officer should be able to look at your activities and understand, what do you care about? Okay. How do you engage? And how have you grown? Big emphasis on the what do you care about? All right. I'm not going to pull up a common data set here, but if you've met with me before, you've seen me do this. On the common data set, there's a chart that tells you what colleges care about, right? And one of the things you'll see is they care about your values, and they care about your volunteer service. That's a big one I should touch on too. At the end today, somebody remind me, I need to talk about community service. I've been getting lots of questions about that. But they should be able to tell a cause you care about. All right. And you might even tie that into your essay. There might be some values alignment. All right, for some colleges, this matters more than others, but all things to think about, right? We've got a common thread that even bleeds into your recommendations. It's everywhere. That's the goal with this really strong extracurricular profile. So I want to show you what this looks like in real life, not as a checklist. Okay, this is not a checklist you're looking at, but there's patterns, okay? We're building logically. So if we look here for like a STEM student, what would this look like? First, we start with early exposure. This is the biggest cliche ever, but all of my engineering kids somehow start with Legos, right? We're never going to write about that in your essay, but it is a thing. It's a cliche, right? But there's some sort of early exposure, or maybe, you know, you had a family member who was sick, or you had your own injury, right? I see a lot my students who want to be in athletic training and they tore their ACL, right? These are all very common early exposure experiences. And then they take that and they research it, right? There's hands-on experience there. And then that leads to a mentorship, typically in their junior year in some capacity, whether through school. A lot of schools will have some sort of like job shadowing opportunity you can do. You can get your CNA license. You can, you know, be in a health science program, things like this, but some sort of mentorship. And then there's real intellectual work on like kind of the capstone there. That progression is what colleges value. Let me show you what this might look like in practice. A student who is an aspiring neuroscientist, 9th grade, they're volunteering at the local hospital. Maybe they shadowed a neurologist. Then in 10th grade, they cold emailed labs and they were accepted into local university research. Emphasis on this is not necessary. And in fact, I want to acknowledge it's hard. A lot of my students right now are cold calling to get some research. I will say, I think I had one student last year who's now a freshman at UCLA. Oh, she's a freshman at USC. I just almost said a sacrilegious thing. She did get into UCLA, but she chose USC, my alma mater. She was my only student who did research in a lab last year. She is going into biology. And the way she got that research, I actually didn't find this out till very recently because I now have a family friend of theirs that I'm working with and we were talking about it. She got the research because it was a family friend that got her the research there, right? I want to acknowledge you can cold call and you should cold call. It's a great experience. And a cold email rather. I have an email template. I'm happy to share it. To shoot me an email and I can send it to you if you don't have it. You can absolutely research labs and try to get research if you're looking into the medical field, but I want to acknowledge it's not easy or expected, okay? College admissions officers 1000% know that kids who are getting research, there's usually some sort of connection. And I mean genuine research. There are some ways to do research through like paid programs that'll guide you in research, and that can be fine and good for exposure. But the student I'm speaking of, like she worked on a virus at the UC San Diego virology lab and was really getting hands-on experience. And again, the way she got that was through a family connection. It's tricky. Most of these research opportunities are going to grad students, right? That's truly a piece of their degree. So anyway, if you can get it, that's fabulous, but it's not expected. Maybe in 11th grade, the student was accepted into a research conference, right? And then they continued the research or published a paper in 12th grade. And I should also mention, this is students who are aiming for like the top 15 schools, okay? If you are looking at, you know, some less selective schools, you definitely don't need this, but this is kind of going to open some doors for you at the top 15 schools. I should have totally started by framing this. Again, acknowledging that research is not always an easy thing to come by. Next up, let's talk a little bit about humanities. And when I say humanities, this is a big umbrella. I see my students who are going into pre-law, students going into philosophy, into journalism, even into business, which is it's totally a different field than journalism, right? Journalism and business are worlds apart, but anyone in a business or humanities field should have some sort of, you know, at least a handful of the words on your screen here. So writing, meaning that's going to be an underlying theme in your degree. In any of the humanities or a business degree, especially my pre-law students, you're going to be doing lots and lots and lots of writing. So there should be some sort of strong emphasis on writing, publishing if possible, teaching if possible, organizing and curating. So these are all abstract. Let's put this into practice. So here's a student who's looking to get into writing. And this actually is modeled off of a student I have who's now at Stanford. He's a philosophy major. So these are some of the sort of things that he did and a lot of similar students have done. 9th grade, writing contests, right? I have a whole list. All of you, if you're working with me, in your folder, your extracurricular activities folder, you have access to a spreadsheet of my favorite extracurricular activities for every single major. In fact, it's probably worth pausing to showcase this. All of you have this in your folder, every single one of you. So when I was just talking about writing, so if you go to my writing tab, for example, I've got a whole bunch of competitions here that my students have engaged in writing. All right. And if you like click on this poetry competitions, these are actually poetry competitions that my student who's now at Stanford, he submitted to all of these poetry competitions when he was in high school. So there's a ton of resources for you, again, for any major. So if you are interested in math, if you're interested in engineering, right? I have a ton of stuff for y'all. Check it out. If you haven't seen this already, it's in your number 2 folder, the extracurricular folder, in your Jess college planning folder. But anyway, writing contests are big. I can point you to that if you need help submitting stuff to writing contests. Online writing program, the number 1 most competitive writing program. I did mention selectivity, right? So if you're looking for selective programs, Iowa Young Writers is the best. And again, pre-law, business, any humanities, writing is going to be key. All of you need to be good writers. That's an excellent program to look at. Getting an internship at a local newsroom would be great. Maybe starting a personal blog, and then maybe publishing something in your senior year or running a writing workshop at your local library, right? This is an example of what that would play out to be. And then lastly, I do have just a general, there's a typo that should say expanding impact, but this is for just leadership in general. If you're going exploratory or you think you're interested in business, but you're not totally sure, identifying a need, taking responsibility, and expanding your impact. That's the framework here. So what does this look like? Here's a student who is all about just leadership in general and likely going to have a social impact, maybe even a psychology type major they're looking at. But in their freshman year, they're volunteering at a nonprofit. Then they're designing their own fundraiser or community event, launching an initiative, and then scaling it, right? Again, focusing on that impact in their junior year, all right? So again, the moral of the story with all of these profiles I just showed you is a great summer does not have to have a name brand program. They just all have growth. That's the common pattern here. And I did mention, right, some can have programs. If you are interested, we can totally talk about that. I will touch on it briefly in a minute here. But you don't have to. You can see, again, we're just building on each year, all right? Colleges really want to see, at the end of the day, students who are curious, they're engaged, and they're taking initiative, all right? Whatever that looks like for you. So here's a framework. One other thing I really want to emphasize today, initiated projects matter, okay? I mentioned at the beginning, I really lingered on that word initiative and impact, starting with the word initiative, right? Initiative matters. You might hear these called passion projects. I don't love to hear that term just because it's really overused, but if that helps you kind of ground what I'm saying, passion projects are essentially what I'm talking about. These are projects that students design themselves. And more often, these stand out way more than structured programs. I have been in conferences with admissions officers who explicitly say they'd rather see students do something on their own in their local community than fly across the country to a summer camp program at a college. Okay, and why is that? Well, again, they show initiative. They also show problem solving. They show leadership. There's real world relevance. Colleges really notice when students create something meaningful, especially when there's limited resources, right? Which these pay-to-play programs or, you know, even structured research programs, or they're handing you things on a silver platter, right? But when you're creating the resources yourself, that is what's most impressive. And this works across activities, across summers, across school years, and more important, it doesn't require permission. You're not cold emailing, you're just creating the opportunity yourself. Right? It doesn't require perfect timing. When you're ready, when you have time, you can get these things together, right? This is the common denominator between all of my students who are admitted to selective schools is they're curious about something. And so they've identified a need in an area they're curious about, right? So some examples, my student, or, David and I worked with a student last year who is now a freshman at Harvard. He created a national hackathon. He created it himself, right? And had competitors from all over the world, had sponsorships, and he scaled it. Like you see here at the bottom, I'm going to talk about scale. He had funding from Google in his junior year for his hackathon, but he identified a need. There was not a hackathon that met, what he was interested in specifically. So he made it, designed a simple solution. And initially it was simple, started small, and then you scale it. So my kids who are here, who are, in 8th, 9th, 10th grade, you've got plenty of time to get to the scale piece, right? My juniors, even you, it's February. We've got 8 months till we're going to hit submit. You've got plenty of time to scale it, whatever your idea is, to scale it. This summer, you could totally dive in and scale something you've already been working on. All right. But this is the framework, and I am going to have a separate workshop that'll be more interactive. These webinars, as you can tell, are very much me sitting here sharing, some information with you. When I have workshops, they're going to be much more interactive, and you're going to be working on some things. You'll come away with a deliverable. In a few weeks, I will have a passion project workshop. So if you're thinking about this, we can work on something. I'm happy to support you. But this is the best case scenario, all right, is that you're creating an opportunity on your own. Chugging along here, I did mention I wanted to talk about summer because a lot of you are planning that out right now. And I want to frame this first. Your summer should not be separate from everything else. It should be an extension of things you're doing throughout the year, right? Doing something one time in the summer and then never expanding on it, right? You keep hearing me say growth, and we're expanding on things that we've done. You should be extending whatever you do in the summer to the rest of your school year. So what I mean by that, your strongest summer plans are going to build on interests that you are engaging in already. Okay, they're going to increase your challenge though, right? And then, of course, the beauty of summer is you've got more time. So in the summer, whatever you're doing in the school year at a lesser scale should really be scaled up, should go deeper, should become more independent. Your summer is an accelerator, right? A chance to really get a lot of work done in a short amount of time and then continue it as you get back into the school year. So, and as we're on the roll of summer, let me briefly talk about the benefits of a formal summer program, because I know I'm kind of dogging on them. The pay to play, I have a lot of families ask me, should I go to this program at UCLA? Should I go to this program at Brown? Should I go to, and the answer is they can be beneficial. It just depends on your goals. Okay. One reason that a summer program like that might be beneficial is just exposure, right? So especially for my students who are totally undecided, and especially for my younger students, a formal summer program can actually be a great window into some of the things you're interested in. And then also they're a great window into dorm life. I think that's a huge benefit to get to live on these campuses, especially these residential programs. You're living in the dorms and talking to students who go there. All of those things can absolutely be beneficial. But if your goal is, is this going to look great on my resume? Is this something that's going to enrich my extracurricular profile? I don't know that I'd pick a summer program, especially as a junior. Now, let me have a little asterisk here, have a caveat that there are some majors where a summer program can be beneficial. For example, if you're an artist or getting into architecture or film, like anything where you're going to have a portfolio, a summer program can absolutely be beneficial because you're creating artifacts for your portfolio most times, okay? But for any other major where you're not going to have a portfolio for part of your submission, I would much rather, again, you self-create. My favorite thing too, if you're not creating your own project, or maybe in tangent with creating your own project, is to intern or job shadow with a local connection, a local business, somebody who is in the field that you're kind of interested in, all right? Again, summer programs are great, but they're not going to stand out. They can benefit you, but they're not necessary. We'd much rather that you do something in your community on your own, all right? So let's talk roadmap from year to year. I am going to walk through this next piece kind of quickly, but I will pause on our juniors because that's where the timing really matters here. All right. So for middle school, if I've got any rising ninth graders here, finishing up their eighth grade year or younger, it's exploration time. Okay, we should absolutely not put pressure on college stuff this early at all. Try some different subjects that maybe you haven't thought about. Start a small project on your own, attend affordable camp, start volunteering. All of these things are what you should be doing as a middle schooler and even into ninth grade, when you should continue that exposure and then start setting a foundation. So again, shadowing somebody. I remember I used to want to own a bakery. When I was in ninth grade, I job shadowed at a local bakery. And I actually did enjoy it, but it ended up I am not a cook or a baker or any of the above. So it ended up not working out for me, but that was a great experience. Sometimes exposure is about ruling things out. Okay, so if you're even a little bit interested in something, you do a program on it, you take a class on it, you shadow somebody and you hate it, that is useful. I have a freshman at UT Austin who is in the BSN program, the nursing program there right now. And her essays, Lisa's here, she's one of Lisa's girls. She wrote about how she knew she didn't want to be a doctor because she shadowed a doctor and she didn't like it. She shadowed a pediatrician. I remember her writing that the pediatrician was spending 5 minutes with her patients and just jumping from room to room. And she didn't like that. Instead, she went and pursued nursing because nurses spend more time with their patients and she wants to build relationships with her patients and all of these things. What a powerful essay. When you can say, instead of just saying, I want to be a nurse because, I had a great nurse one time and I've taken biology and I really like it, right? But saying I was able to actually rule other healthcare pathways out, and I know this is the right thing for me, it works, right? She's in one of the most competitive programs in the country. So that is awesome. Exposure can sometimes be ruling things out, 1000%. So especially for my undecided students, I should say, jump into as many opportunities as you can and figure out what you don't like just as much as what you do like, all right? Try a low barrier online course. I can put in the chat 2 of my favorite edX and Coursera. These are 2 open courseware sites where essentially you can log on and take free open courses at a number of colleges like MIT, Harvard, UCLA, a bunch of universities just have live courses on there that you can take in any subject: business, finance, math, engineering, astrophysics. I mean, a ton of stuff. And again, open courseware, meaning it's not graded. It's just for you to go in and figure out if you enjoy it. These are things we can certainly put on your extracurricular profile if you feel like, that was a meaningful experience to you. But I should mention too, not everything has to be on your extracurricular profile, right? This can be a launching pad for something you'll actually, okay, so I took this business class at Penn on Coursera and I loved it. So it led me to take the business class at my school, which led me to an internship, which led me to, so it doesn't have to be for your resume, but rather just for exposure. Again, that's the goal in ninth grade. That's great. They're free, no pressure. You can pay to get feedback if you want feedback from the instructor, but you don't need to do that if the goal here is exposure. Volunteering. Let me take this opportunity to talk about community service too. Community service is excellent. Now, I often hear this misconception that how many hours of community service do I need on my application? How do I verify my hours? Things like this. There is no such thing. Colleges are not verifying your community service hours. There's no place that they ask for your community service hours. That's just not a thing in college admissions. But they do, of course, want to see students who are volunteering in their community. I mean, it tells our story, right, about where our heart is, why we do what we are doing. It just makes you a human. I think it's important just for character building. And there are some colleges who that's a huge value of theirs, and it can mean a lot to them if you've got community service on your extracurriculars. But I would suggest if a student comes to me and asks, what should I volunteer in? Just pursue the things that you care about, right? What are your family's values? What are your values? And how can you participate in that? So, I was talking to a student this past week who loves IT and can fix computers and is really close with his grandparents. And they were asking me, should I go and volunteer at the local nursing home and do, that is fabulous. Set up IT stuff for nursing homes. That's great. My student who's at UT Austin, she used to go play piano at the hospice care facility. And, there's just so many things you can do depending on what's affected you and your family. My juniors, my favorite webinar I do every year is in June. I will train you to be admissions officers. We'll read applications. And one of the applications you will read, he was all about food waste. And it ended up motivating him in his career field. And you'll see his extracurriculars, and all of them have to do with food waste, creating a nonprofit, putting programs in high schools about food waste, things like this. Oftentimes it's intertwined with your career goals, right? If all of you look back in that folder you have where I just shared my screen and showed you that spreadsheet, you've got another spreadsheet in there that shows you 2 exemplar extracurricular profiles, I call them. And one of the students, there isn't really a connection, so to say. His major is engineering, but you'll see in his extracurriculars, he testified in the state Senate that every student deserves to have access to STEM programs like he did, right? So community service, advocating, all of these things are not necessary, but man, that makes a good human. And that's what selective schools want, right? Again, they're building a class and they do want students who are going to stand up for what's right, whatever that means to them. I mean, and it could be as simple as like my mom has dementia, right? And that's something that's important in my family. Creating some sort of club at your school that collects puzzles and brings them to dementia patients, like fabulous, right? You don't have to overthink it at all. But if you have something that's important to you, do it. That's great. Moving on here to the 10th grade. So again, if we're building on the previous year, now maybe we're applying to some mid-selective programs. Maybe that's of interest to you. Maybe we're joining a team. So we were doing things on our own. Maybe now we're getting a team together to scale our ideas. Maybe we are cold emailing for some research. And maybe we're expanding a self-created project we started in 9th grade. And then in 11th grade, my juniors, of course, this is your peak year, right? So this is the year that we're building on all of our experiences and stories that are going to show up in our applications. So internships, this is my favorite year for internships. At any year, these are great, but internships are, I think, the best thing you can do. I have students all the time too ask me about paid jobs. Colleges love paid jobs. You learn a lot when you have a paid job that is on your resume. Leading or scaling a community project that you started, applying to more competitive programs, and then maybe taking a dual enrollment class or an advanced college course. These are always good things to do in the summer. All right. And one thing I want to emphasize, and I did want to leave quite a bit of time for questions because I know I've got a lot of questions here. So my goal is to leave about 15 to 20 minutes for questions, and I'm going to answer some Q&As that I get all the time. But this is something I say in every webinar or meeting that I talk about extracurriculars, okay? It is never about what you do, okay? If you're going to come to me and ask me, is this activity good? I'm interested in this. Is this good to put? Yes. My answer is always going to be yes. Okay. Well, I shouldn't say always because sometimes I might steer you away from saying I had a student who had a bad experience or something like this, but mostly yes. If you're interested, the answer is yes, but it's about how we frame it on your application. Okay. How do we frame it on your application? So you can learn so many skills and lessons working at a local restaurant. You can be a leader, like we talked about, even if you're not president. So, I keep going back to my student today at UT Austin, but she's such a good example for all of this. She's in the nursing program, right? Healthcare is her thing, but she also loved marching band and was super involved in marching band. For any of my families here in Texas, Texas football and the marching band, like it's a whole thing, right? Their practices are intense and they've got competitions every football game, most of the basketball games. It's intense. And again, like I just shared with you, one of her favorite extracurriculars was playing piano for her dementia patients. And in her personal statement, she wrote about like watching a dementia patient close her eyes and dance as she was playing piano. And it was just beautiful. She's like, I remember her, I read it all the time, her essay, because I use it as an example, but she wrote about how, this person who was dying, she was imagining her as a 16-year-old and this music connected her to her patients. And what a fabulous way to frame this music piece of her, right? And again, she talked about how that experience prepared her to be a more empathetic nurse that connects with her patients. Or another example you may have heard me talk about too, our student who's a freshman at Harvard, David's student. He's a computer science major this year. And his goal is to work in educational technology. And he does stand-up comedy on the weekends. And it's such a good example too, because he didn't even put that on his extracurriculars, right? Like my UT Austin student, that was on her extracurriculars. The marching band, 1,000%. That's a huge undertaking that was on her resume. But for this student who's at Harvard, we did not put stand-up comedy on his resume, right? It was just a hobby, and that's okay and great too. But the way he framed that on his essay was so powerful. He talked about how that experience essentially prepared him to face failure. And how he aspires to go give a pitch in a boardroom one day, and he's going to use what he learned on that stage bombing, because he said, if I can bomb on that stage, I can conquer any intimidating executive. And I love that. Our extracurriculars shape us as humans, right? So important. And again, I started my meeting with you today saying that not everything you do has to be for your college applications, right? In fact, I prefer that you don't look at it that way. Of course, we need to acknowledge that it's going to eventually go on your resume, and which, when you're weighing some options, I will be always, I will be explicit with you about which the best opportunity is for you, right? But sometimes it's okay to just have fun as well. Being a human is the number one thing. That's the number one requirement to get into college. You have to be a human, okay? That's what colleges look for in their applicants. So again, no matter what you do, it's about how we frame it. Your experiences that you do outside of school are going to become some of the richest stories in your essays, right? Even if they don't make the cut, we've got 10 spots, like I mentioned today. Even if they don't make the cut for your 10, colleges are 1,000% going to ask you, why do you want to major in this major? And so there might be an experience you did in 9th grade as a one-time thing. It was pretty casual, but it becomes your seed that launched the rest of your interest in your major, right? So, all of these things can just make your personal statement, your supplemental essays, all of it a little richer too. So outside of the activities list, there's other benefits to every activity you do. And speaking of personal statement, it's time, juniors. My juniors are thinking about the personal statement already. You'll hear me say this is not a cover letter. Your college essay might not mention any of your extracurriculars. Often it does. But we'll talk about this too as we talk about your essay. So with that, I'm perfectly on time. I'm almost at my 15 minutes for Q&A. But before I do that, I do have, so most of you are my students already. If you're my student already, February 15th, I am going to do a webinar on, can you see my cursor there? I think now you can. There we go. February 15th, I am going to do a workshop. It's totally optional, but it is free for you. It's open to the public for a fee, but for all of my students, it's free. It's a Sunday, February 15th. I am going to do a workshop on how to jump into a passion project specifically. So if you're interested in that, I will send out information later on this week, but I would love to have you join me on that. And then so just looking forward a little bit, I'm doing a college list webinar for the public on March 1st, just college list 101. And then in April, for any of my athletes, this is tied to today. If any of you are athletes, so important how we frame what you're doing on your applications. And if you're interested in recruitment, we can talk about that. You all know I'm married to a college football coach, so I love to talk about that. But Coach Helen Williams is on my team, and she is the most knowledgeable person ever. She played women's basketball at Wake Forest. She coached at Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Mary Mac, the Naval Academy. I mean, just brilliant. She's got lots and lots of insight. So if you are interested in athletics, recruitment, and all that good stuff, please join us on April 26th for that. But yeah, so I'm here for support in whatever you want to do with your extracurricular profile, whether it be recruitment or something more casual with your athletic stuff. If you want to start a passion project, I also will do a resume workshop later on in the month. Pick and choose what you want to join to go deeper, and I can help you get to where you want to be. One last thing I will say, as you are wrapping up your plans for this summer, if you still need support, please reach out. I'm happy to help you with applications, help you with cold emailing, help you with cover letters, help you build a resume if you need that. I'm here as a resource. So let me know. All right. I wanted to leave some time for Q&A. I think I did mention most of my Q&As that I get as I was chatting. So I'll kind of leave that up to y'all. If you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. And I'll share my end slide in case we have no Q&A, but I was hoping that y'all would have some questions as we were chugging along, but nothing. If you don't have any questions, you can hop off and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I have a QR code here if you want to book a meeting with me. And in fact, that's not my student link. If you need a student link, let me get my student link in the chat. That one's for if you are not my student and you want to meet with me. But here's my link. If you are my student and want to meet with me, is in the chat. But otherwise, have a good Sunday. Ask me your questions, and I'll see you soon, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kennedy, good question. For jobs in the summer, when do applications for those generally start? So for any jobs, typically they're just rolling. So it doesn't hurt to put out feelers right now and ask, I'm a high school student. My availability is this in the summer. Do you have anything that would align with those hours? I could even, you could even offer, I could start in the weekends while we're in school this spring. But I would say there's not typically a timeline for like a summer job, but it doesn't hurt to put out feelers to see if they've got the capacity and when they're doing hiring. So if you've got a specific job in mind, Kennedy, you can always text me and I can kind of give you some pointers. But I would say if you're interested in a summer job, reach out now and just say, hey, I will be available this summer. When is a good time to get in touch with you? I don't know how to stop recording. Let me see here. There we go.